Good morning to all my friends and family, and welcome to this episode of Jim's 5am Club. It's Wednesday, it's hump day, it's an overcast summer Sydney day, and what I'd love to do today is go through yet another book summary. And today's book summary is an absolute cracker. It's named Dopamine Nation by an author named Lembke. And Anne, in her book here, basically goes through and unravels the mystery of cravings, addictions, and this whole dopamine addiction that we have in spades in this modern world that we live in. But the big lesson that comes from this author is the realization that there is a paradox, and the paradox is that hedonism, the pursuit of pleasure for its own sake, leads to a thing called anhedonia, which is the inability to enjoy pleasure of any kind. So in a nutshell, what this author teaches us, what this author is saying, is that too much of anything leads to displeasure, leads to the inability to continue to gain pleasure from something. I remember as a young student, when I was at university studying economics, the economics professor talked about the laws of supply and demand. And he said that if you have too much of anything, then sooner or later you're going to get sick of it, and sooner or later the demand for it will drop off. And he gave an example of when you go for morning tea and you haven't had anything to eat all night and you're feeling a bit peckish. You may order yourself a cream bun, and when you peel that cream bun apart and enjoy the sugary taste of the cream, the jam and the bun, then you may say, well, should I have another one? And you're feeling a little bit more hungry, so you grab a second one, which you will continue to eat. And then you get to the third one and you're feeling a little bit less desirous, and then you get to a point where you just can't have any more because you're sick of it. So that's something that happens to all of us. If you have too much of anything, then you get sick of it and you may not want it ever again. The same thing happens with alcohol. When we overindulge and we get drunk as uni students, drunk on ouzo, drunk on zambucas, or drunk on anything. Now there'll come a period where you may never ever have an ouzo ever again in your life because you felt so bad on that night that you were just so intoxicated that you were just made sick. So the author goes on to say and gives us a clear understanding that we live in a world today, we live in a generation which is unlike any other generation, because compared to all the generations that have come before us, all the generations that have lived on this earth, we live in times of extreme opulence, to the point where most people, even working class, even welfare class people, live better than the kings and queens of old. We can travel locally, domestically, internationally. We have access to the internet. We can live vicariously through other people's posts, through other people's pictures, through other people's experiences. And we can basically live better than a king or a queen that has ever existed on this planet. In a nutshell, we live in a world of extreme opportunity, and we live in a world of dopamine addiction. We are surrounded by people who are addicted to pleasure, who are addicted to dopamine, the pleasure drug, because we have learnt to overconsume. We eat cake on a daily basis, just like it is our birthday every day. Now, once upon a time, you'd probably have cake once or twice a year, on your birthday or on a friend's birthday or on a special occasion. Whereas today, people are overindulging in all the pleasures of life, as if every single day is a special day, every single day is their birthday. And what the author here says, and what this book does, is it examines how pain and pleasure work on the brain, and how we become prisoners of our pleasures, and those pleasures lead eventually to us becoming prisoners of pain, discomfort, and misery. So the first formal point that comes from this author is where she talks about how this dopamine addiction comes about. And she says that dopamine addiction follows from our desire to stop feeling miserable. And the reason why we feel miserable is manifold. There are many reasons why people feel miserable, but from a Christian perspective, the main reason that we have is that people feel miserable because they are separated from God. And have become metheists, have become selfish people who only want to please themselves, only want to achieve things that are going to give them pleasure. And we've slowly grown apart from our mission in life, which is to serve God with all our heart, mind and soul, to love God first, and to serve each other, to love one another as we love ourselves. I think we've overindulged on the loving of ourselves to the point where we've become selfish, indulgent metheists. So we have to understand also that life is a journey, a beautiful journey. We all have a lifetime, but that journey has many ups and downs, ins and outs, and it's based on our interpretation and meaning that we attach to life's variable and valuable experiences. At the end of the day, no two people have the same life. No two people experience the same things. Everybody, every single person who has ever lived is going to have a different past. They're going to experience a different now, a different present. I am here, you're somewhere else. And even if you were here side by side with me, you'd have a different perspective. You'd be looking at different things. Your interpretation of the stimuli that are being taken in right now may be completely different to the interpretation and the meaning that I'm placing on what I see, what I feel, what I smell, what I hear, what I touch. So what this author is saying is that we're all going to see things differently, and based on the way we see things, based on the way we interpret things, we'll build and create our worldview. And that worldview that we all have built and generated will shape how we see things, how we understand things, how we look at things, and will shape our slither and our slithers of reality. Because we can only get slithers of reality. We can't live a perfect life where we take in everything, at least at the conscious level. We may be taking in a lot more things at the subconscious level, but at the conscious level, we can only process certain amounts of things at a particular time before we become overwhelmed. And hence, that is why God only gives us slithers of reality to help us build a picture in our lives of what our truth is, what our reality is, but we need to do it with the right mindset, and we need to give it the right interpretation, and we need to do, of course, things in our life that are God-pleasing. That things that are God-pleasing, of course, are things that serve God, serve God's mission, where we partner with God to glorify Him, to enjoy creation, and to use the various virtues, the various charismata, the various gifts that we have. And we are all made in God's image, which means that we all have elements of His virtues. We all have elements of His glory in various proportions, but we have them in small proportions. We don't have them in the proportions that God has. But because we have these elements in different proportions, we need to each figure out how to live our lives and make the most of those elements, how to mix them, how to shape them, how to bring them together to create a lifetime of achievement, a lifetime of works where we celebrate what we have, we leverage what we have, and we make the most of what we have within the allotted time, in the allotted lifetime that we have. But to understand that along the way we're going to have ups and downs, good times and bad times, of our own making, and of other people's making. So we're going to contribute to other people's good times and bad times, and other people are going to contribute to our good times and bad times. And the hope is that on average we contribute in a positive way to each other's growth and development. But we need pain and we need pleasure. We need good, we need bad. We need all of these things, but it's how we interpret these things which create the meaning of these things, and help us generate our own worldview. But the sad thing is that we're wired in a way that we're not good at dealing with pain, and we try to cover it up with small doses of pleasure along the way. And we loved being distracted from our mission in life, and we turn to these distractions like drugs, alcohol, and other simple pleasures to help numb the pain, reduce the stress, and eliminate the anxiety that we feel, because we worry too much about the future. We worry too much about the uncertainty of our future. We are surrounded, rightly or wrongly, by fear, uncertainty and doubt. that's generated by our families, our friends, the media, our societies. It's generated in some ways to control us, in other ways it's just embedded in society, in the family unit. So what the author here says in terms of a call to action is what we need to do where possible is to restrict these stimuli and listen to our inner voices and trying to find out what we're trying to cover up, and find the sources of our distress and misery and cure it. And the way we cure it is by facing it front on and being open and honest with others, open and honest with ourselves, and knowing that if we're not careful, if we don't solve our issues, our challenges, and we keep on covering them up with pleasures and distractions, that we're not going to solve our problems, we're not going to solve those niggling problems that niggle us at the subconscious level and at the conscious level, and they're just going to snowball and just keep on getting worse and worse, and they're going to fuel further misery and discomfort and lead to mood swings and other challenges that will not only impact our lives but will impact the lives of others around us. So I'll just go and start walking now, but the author tells us here that we're constantly fulfilling our dopamine cravings, which leads to a condition called neuroadaptation. So what the author is saying here is that every time you indulge and overindulge, what you're doing is you're creating and you're secreting these dopamine pleasure chemicals into our bodies. And every time you do something that creates pleasure, your body will secrete a certain amount of dopamine into your body as a reward. But when you do it over and over again, you need to increase the experience in order to get the same hit of dopamine, the same hit of pleasure hormone, which means that we need to increase the risks that we take. We need to do it more in order to get the same hit, which creates cravings and which creates addictions, just like similarly to what happens with drugs, what happens with gaming, what happens with watching porn, that there gets to a point where you just need greater violence in the games, greater violence in the pornography, more risk in the adventures that you take in life in order to get the same sort of pleasure. So that's the way the brain functions. And because what happens is the body gets used to our dopamine, and we need to crave more and more because the brain builds a resistance, and we need a bigger hit in order to feel the same level of pleasure as before. And as we said, this is called neuroadaptation, which leads to addiction. And it's interesting to understand that because we're all different, because people are generally different, we have different levels of dopamine secretion into our bodies. Our genes have a lot to answer for. There are some people who have inherited genes from their parents, from their culture, from their forefathers, which secrete a lot more dopamine into the body. There are others who don't secrete a lot of dopamine into their body, which means that they're less prone to feeling the ups and downs of these cravings. So through no fault of your own is what I'm trying to say, some people are more inclined to have addictive personalities because their bodies react in a way that leads to this addiction by being overly sensitive and easily stimulated in terms of releasing these chemicals into the bloodstream. But the author also goes to say that with these addictions, with this dopamine, this pleasure chemical which comes into our bodies, we're inclined to have mood swings, we're inclined to be cranky, and hence these are sort of indicators in terms of what sort of person or personality type is more inclined to be addicted to certain things. I remember reading ages ago how people attract people to the striptease industry, and it's all done via a grooming process where they try and identify the sort of personality that would have an addictive sort of personality. And what they do is look for young females who are attractive, and they look for people who already have an addiction. And the dead giveaway, of course, is smoking. So if they already smoke, then chances are that they have an addictive personality. If they've got tattoos, if they've got piercings, and if they've got body augmentation, all of these things are clues to the ones looking to groom them in terms of who the right person is for them to manipulate. So as we're saying here, the first thing they do is identify the personality type that is the type that is easily manipulated and can become hooked and a junkie for pleasure. And then the next thing they do is they invite them to come down for a competition. They tell them how beautiful they are, how smart they are, how cool they are, and they invite them to come down for a competition, just a bikini modelling competition at the pub. And of course they bring them in and they allow them to win. So they give them a big trophy, they give them lots of prize money to get them hooked, get them sucked in. Then the next stage after that is they invite them to then do some lingerie modelling, where they serve drinks at functions wearing lingerie. But once again, it's a small step up in the risk profile, but it stimulates the pain-pleasure sequence, where the body receives based on the risk that they feel and the nervousness that they feel. They get rewarded with dopamine, and by just going and doing the lingerie serving waitressing, once again they get paid lots of money a lot more money than what they deserve to get, and they go, how easy is this? I just turn up with my underwear, I just talk to men and women wearing my underwear and get paid all of this money. How cool am I? How smart am I? And then it goes on from there. The next step is they're then asked to do topless waitressing. Then they invite them in for another type of competition, where instead of modelling lingerie, they'll come in and ask them to be a nude model. And once again, it's a small step up, but the body, the brain is used to it because they've been through the previous 2 or 3 grooming steps. And these people who manipulate the young girls know how the brain works, and what they do is they just do it step by step. It's a step process, give them an inch and then you take another inch, another inch, another inch, and before you know it, you've got them on stage as strippers. They're taking drugs. Then at some sort of point they get involved with pornography, taking photos, making great money, but all of that money ends up going to the drug dealers, going to the hanger-oners, until they end up in prostitution and wonder how they ever got there. So once again, all of this is a process because they've become addicted to dopamine. This addiction has led to their manipulation and their imprisonment based on what other people want them to do. So they get to the point where they lose their freedom and they're sucked into a life of vice and crime. Anyway, what else can I say? Let me just have a look down here at my notes. And as we say here, pleasure is not free, as it is followed by pain. So you can't live a life of extreme vice and pleasure and not have a down, not have some pain. The drugs will build them up, and then once the drug impact finishes, they'll use alcohol, they'll do whatever they have to do to try and maintain a level of happiness. But as we know, as we see, it leads to displeasure, it leads to misery, it leads to the hate of oneself, and it's just an ugly downward spiral. So what else can we say here? Pleasure is not free, as it's followed by pain, and we need to fight, we need to resist, and we need to fast from these cravings in order to restore balance to our mind, body and spirit. Because what happens is that too much pleasure throws out the mind, body and spirit and brings a lack of balance. And because of that, we need to step back, cleanse ourselves. And this is what I love about the Christian faith, the Greek Orthodox Church, is that the Greek Orthodox Church has a number of periods throughout the year where one is called to fast. One is called to strict fast from pleasures. The fast includes not eating, not overindulging in your eating, being restricted in the calories and the type of calories that you ingest. It means restricting yourself from worldly pleasures and focusing your mind on Scripture and bringing a balance, a spiritual balance, into your life. So what we're saying here is that, if one follows the basic Christian principles and leads a Christian life, then they're more likely to be relieved of these dopamine cravings from a negative perspective. Because what the author here is saying is that resistance, forcing yourself into pleasure exile, can work in a positive way, because by forcing yourself not to do something for a period of time creates pain, and when you relieve yourself of that pain, it generates pleasure and releases dopamine into your system. So it can work in reverse. So you don't need to over consume, you don't need to over stimulate your body, your life, your mind in order to get a dopamine hit. What you can do is, through planned and organised resistance, by fasting, by not doing things for a certain amount of time, that can also help you gain the pleasure in a way that's going to be productive and positive to your body, mind and spirit. Just bear with me for a second. So what we're saying here is that if you're clever and if you tap into the benefits, the time-tested benefits that have been generated over thousands of years of Christian development, the words of God, is that we can use pain as a dopamine source, and it can help promote well-being, because pain can precede pleasure, and a lot of athletes have cottoned on to this. A lot of people who are runners, who are weightlifters, who are swimmers, people who exercise regularly know that they can put their bodies through pain on a daily basis and persist with that pain, knowing that that pain is going to be relieved by the dopamine secretion into their bloodstream. Because, believe it or not, dopamine has a strong pain-killing effect, a numbing effect, much stronger than morphine. So that's why people can run marathons, people can run extreme marathons and feel better after the marathon. Just like when a mother gives birth, goes through tremendous pain to bring into the world, to naturally bring into a world a baby. Once that baby is born, there's a sense of euphoria that they feel, and that's the pleasure that follows the pain. So one of the calls to action from this author is to think about ways that you can resist. Think about ways that you can fast. Think of ways that you can limit the pleasures that you have, so that you can regulate the dopamine secretion into your body based on doing certain things at certain times of your life to increase and improve your total well-being, the well-being of your mind, body and soul. So things like fasting, things like cold showers, things like walking in a cold wind, all of those things is what the author is suggesting, that the reason why we do them is that we know that at the end of it we're going to feel better by not doing them, because they of themselves secrete the dopamine to our bodies without us having to over-consume and overindulge and get to the point where we no longer feel happiness anymore. So once again, the key message from this book, the key message from this author, is that if you do too much of something, your body gets to a point of neuroadaptation. Your body gets to a point where it becomes numb and no longer feels happiness, no longer feels the pleasure of you doing the same thing over and over again. And that in itself is a huge warning, because as we said before, there are people who can spend their whole lives working to make money. There are people that can spend their whole lives traveling. There are people who can spend their whole lives eating, overindulging in alcohol, cigarettes, drugs, pornography, sex. And it gets to the point where they wake up one day and they say, what's it all for? I don't feel any better. If anything, I feel worse. I feel empty. I feel lonely. And the reason for that is that their cravings can no longer be satisfied by just doing the same thing over and over again. They need to do things which are much, much more than what they had to do before. So thank you very much for joining me on this episode of Jim's 5am Club on this mid-week Wednesday morning. It's a powerful book, powerful message, and that's what I love about Jim's 5am Club, is that we get to learn something new every single morning, every single day. We get to share it, and we get to look at ways in which we can use this OPE, other people's experiences, in our lives. These are life hacks that we can use and learn from. So another wonderful lesson today. I'm really happy I did this, and it enables me to join the dots and to be a little bit more aware of how my brain works, how the chemicals in my body work, and how they can be used in a positive way, or how they can be used and abused in a negative way by ourselves and others. So take care, and we'll chat again. I'll come to you from hopefully a different place with a different message of empowerment, where we can live, learn and pass it on. Take care everybody, yasas, and bye for now, and happy Wednesday. Ciao.